In this video, I want to talk a little bit about everyday wellness and just a couple processes here. And that's going to be recognition and cognizance, and how they can actually in every day start to cultivate greater well-being for us in relation to the self directly and the self and the surroundings in particular. And this usually starts with the recognition of the self within the self, rather than recognizing the self in another per se. Because what's going to impact the well-being of another isn't necessarily going to impact the well-being of the self. And this is predominant mostly in individuals who are agreeable, as well as extroverts, who in the case of the extrovert, they tend to be more motivated here by the extrinsic motivations. Extrinsic motivations being what's typically rewarding to status, or that's culturally influenced. And it also has more to do with our primitive motivations, such as sex, need for resources in particular. So, in the context of everyday living and within civilization, that's often money or monetary resources, but it could be other resources. Like it could be property, for example, a particular item, and then also social status too, to be often liked or held in high esteem, to be viewed as competent or a leader, to have authority, but without actually wanting to have to earn that. And that's key, because often intrinsic motivations have a lot to do with a willingness to pursue difficulties for what one wants and is willing to achieve. And it's more process and expressive based rather than extrinsic motivation. Because what you see is if you get the reward in extrinsic motivation, often the process to get there and the expression of behavior typically ceases, or it becomes more fragile, and it becomes more finite, and the positive emotion associated with progression and the expression declines, where an intrinsic motivation, it increases. And so the process and the expression, the journey there, actually tends to impart greater well-being for individuals who are more intrinsically motivated. And that's what we tend to see across various psychological studies and also neurological studies in science regarding well-being, particularly as it pertains to intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. And agreeable individuals tend to look at others, and they tend to often subvert their own needs and motivations in favor for others, because they typically actually have a motivation that isn't always recognized in themselves. It's occurring a little bit at a higher frequency than others, and that has to do with this motivation for affiliation and more relatedness, has more to do with this sense of relatedness and feeling connected to others and sharing a commonality. And what's very, very useful there is to develop a sense of individuality and to distinguish the self within the self from another, with a self, and then other selves. And so the making this distinction is important because we can recognize our own unique motivations and our motivations within our particular domains of interest, and also our competencies, and recognize our competencies, and where our motivations, perceptions, feelings, emotions, and actions are different than others, but different in a way that's directed towards more of promoting positive well-being, and that directly promotes more of these positive perceptions, motivations, emotions, feelings, and actions within the self rather than within another. And that's very, very important. So when we're talking about recognition here, it's important to recognize the self in relation to what imparts greater well-being, greater positive emotion, greater positive perception, greater positive motivations, greater positive feelings, greater positive actions, greater positive behaviors, but also meaning, and that the meaning that cultivates more of these meaningful processes, as well as values, that like the reason why we do things, and why it matters to us, why they're important, the significance behind them, and the potency it has, the degree of effect and efficacy these various constituents of personality have on us, and these state-like qualities. That's very important. Just recognizing that starts to build greater self-intelligence and wisdom, that we can use to cultivate greater well-being. While cognizance involves a recognition component, is primarily a perceptual process, and that involves thinking but also awareness and being aware of the contents of our perceptions. And that can involve perception itself, motivation, emotion, feelings, actions, behaviors, specific meanings, so what's in our surroundings, what a current experience means, the significance of that experience or non-significance, the efficacy, so how that's impacting us or influencing us, and the effect, and that more relates to how that influence will later impact us or has subsequently impacted us and is affecting us right now, as well as various direct precepts, right? That we're gathering knowns from through information components that is directly related to our precepts and how we go about interpreting that through various interpolations and extrapolations, which have more to do with expressions and our self-subjective connection with the precept that expresses different processes in relation to that self-subjectivity. And cognizance is highly important as developing greater self-intelligence and also learning in particular and learning how to improve our well-being and particularly optimize well-being in relation to the self. As we become more cognizant, we engage more in this psychological stimulation that involves a deliberate meaning process and deliberate thinking and deliberate perceptions. But it's also important to parse those two out. Psychological stimulation isn't the same thing as deliberate thought or even cognizance as well, because cognizance can have the state of mindfulness in which you're not necessarily stimulating too much perception. You're more in this open framework that's gathering information, and then it comes back and informs the perceptual process. So you think again, and then you're more aware, and then you think again about what you're aware of. And that fuels this subsequent set of perceptions, motivations, emotions, feelings, and actions that is part of this cognizance and developing greater cognizance. And that's a very cerebral process that imparts greater benefit to learning, but also well-being through this optimization of learning and well-being. So that's all I wanted to say for that for now, and I'll be talking about this more in upcoming videos, as well as a bit in upcoming series, and I'm going to be doing some writing that I'll be publishing soon. You probably have noticed I haven't been writing too much, at least publishing too much. I've been writing a ton on my own in journals and my own personal works, but I haven't been posting. I've made a commitment to myself not to do that this month, just to focus more on editing in these videos. But upcoming in July, there will be a lot of content coming your way, a lot more writing and publications. So that's just a brief update, and I hope you enjoy.